Good morning or afternoon, first grade. Hope you're having a most excellent day. It is one of the best times of the day when we get to share some stories together. We're going to continue with the books that we started yesterday. First, a fiction story, the true story of the three little pigs, but this is told from the point of view of the wolf, Alexander T. Wolf. He's our main character, and this story is told from his point of view, so it's like he's the good character, and the pigs are part of the problem because, as we saw yesterday, all Wolf wanted to do was get some sugar so he could finish making the cake for his poor old granny. And it's also true that, according to Alexander T. Wolf, he just had a bad cold and he kept sneezing. And the effect of the pigs building flimsy houses is that they would blow over. So we're going to keep reading, and then at the end, you get to decide who was the good character and who was the problem character. So last we read, the wolf had tried to get some sugar from both the first pig with the straw house and the second pig with the wood house. Both times those pigs were not very nice. They didn't welcome the wolf, and the wolf wound up sneezing and blowing their house down. That's what Alexander Wolf says. And then, last page we read, Alexander T. Wolf came to the third pig's house, and look at that. It's all built with brick. Looks like it might even have a lock on it. It looks really solid. Here's my bookmark. I'm going to take it off. All right. So it's always good to reread the last page just to see where you're at. So it says, now you know that food will spoil if you leave it out in the open. So this is talking back after he sneezed and the second pig's house blew down. So I did the only thing there was to do. I had dinner again. Think of it as a second helping. I was getting awfully full, but my cold, it was starting to feel better. However, I still didn't have that cup of sugar for my dear old granny's birthday cake. So I went to the next house. This guy was the first and second little pig's brother. He must have been the brains of the family. He had built his house out of brick. I knocked on the brick house. No answer. I called, Mr. Pig, Mr. Pig, are you in? And do you know what that rude little porker answered? Get out of here, Wolf. Don't bother me again. That's not very nice. Talk about impolite. He probably had a whole sack full of sugar, and he wouldn't give me even one little cup for my dear, sweet old granny's birthday cake. What a pig! I was just about to go home and maybe make a nice birthday card instead of a cake when I felt my cold coming on. I huffed and I snuffed and I sneezed once again. And then that third little pig yelled, and your old granny can sit on a pin. Now, I'm usually a pretty calm fellow, but when somebody talks about my granny like that, I get a little crazy. Now, when the cops drove up, of course, I was trying to break down this pig's door, and the whole time I was huffing and puffing and sneezing and making a real scene. The news reporters found out about the two pigs I had for dinner. They figured a sick guy going to borrow a cup of sugar, that didn't sound very exciting. So they jazzed up the story with all of this huff and puff and blow your house down stuff, and they made me out to be the big, bad wolf. The rest, as they say, is history. And there's the newspaper story. Big Bad Wolf. It says, Wolf says, I'll huff and I'll puff. Here it says, A.T. Wolf, big and bad. That's it. That's the whole story. I was framed. You know what that means? It means being set up to be the bad guy or to be the person who did something wrong, even if you didn't. He says, but maybe can you spare me a cup of sugar? He says while he's in jail. And look at the jail guard. It's a pig. So, what do you think? First of all, did the wolf's problem get solved? Not really. However, the problem did kind of go away because it got replaced with a bigger problem. And sometimes that's part of fiction. The problem doesn't always get solved, but it kind of gets replaced with a bigger problem. In this case, Wolf's bigger problem was that he got arrested for he was out of control. He was so angry after the third pig said those mean things about his granny. So here's a picture of a police officer pig. Here's a newspaper or TV reporter pig. And so he wound up getting all these bad stories written about him in the newspaper. And then he wound up in jail. Now, did the author's words tell us that the wolf wound up in jail? No. But you can tell from the picture, and we can infer from what we already know about the world that that's jail, and it must be that the wolf was thrown in jail he says he was framed, that he didn't really kill the first two pigs. They just died accidentally after he sneezed on the house. And yeah, he was upset at the third pig, but that was because the third pig said that mean thing about his granny. What do you think? Do you believe the pigs or the wolves? That's your call. You get to make that decision. All right. I would just say whichever decision you make, have some evidence to support it. All right. That's a good rule for life. Now we're going to move on to nonfiction, continuing to read about the United Kingdom. And yesterday we read about traveling around London. We also read about what it was like to go to school in the UK and some of the different meanings of the words. Even though they speak the same language as we do, some of their words are a little different. So we learned also about London. We learned about Buckingham Palace and Big Ben. That's what our Big Ben is named after, right? Big Ben, the big clock tower in London. In fact, I am told, I think that's the largest four-faced clock in the world. Somebody told me, I'm not sure if this is true, but have you ever driven to downtown Milwaukee and on the way on the highway? There's a very big four-sided clock tower between the highway and the lake. It's called the Allen Bradley clock. And someone told me that might be the second biggest four-sided clock tower in the world. I don't know if that's true, but it'd be pretty cool if it was true. This is the biggest, though. And we learned about Hyde Park and London Tower. So now we're going to read about some other places in the UK. The first one, other capitals, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and Belfast. So remember, the UK is made up of 4 regions. One is England, and London is the capital of England, but the others are Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, Cardiff is the capital of Wales, and Belfast is the capital of Northern Ireland. So it says more than 80% of the people in the UK live in cities and towns. After you leave London, visit the capitals of the other regions for a taste of city life across the country. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland. Edinburgh Castle here has plenty of nooks and crannies to explore. After that, take a fright-filled Cadiz and Witchery tour through the old part of the city. Cardiff on the coast is the capital of Wales. See great castles and cathedrals in this city. You can also step back in time at the St. Fagans National Museum of History. It's an outdoor museum that's lots of fun, and look at what's at that museum. Does that look like a T-Rex? You can also take a boat to Belfast, the capital of Northern Ireland. Go to Cave Hill to hike, picnic, and see a range of ancient sites. The Ulster Museum is also terrific. It is chock full of dinosaurs and mummies. Oh, I made a mistake. This is the Ulster Museum where there's the dinosaurs. This is in Cardiff in Wales. It's there's lots of wild horses out there. And when I was living in the UK, the horses, they also had miniature horses riding, who lived out in the country, and they would come right up to your car when you were driving through. Two other interesting places in the UK are Stonehenge and Loch Ness. As you travel through the winding roads and historic villages outside of our cities, there are two stops you must make. One is Stonehenge. People first started building this prehistoric stone monument about 3,000 years before Christ, before Jesus was born. No one knows how it was built or why. Some people think it's a calendar connected to the movements of the sun. There are other ancient sites nearby worth visiting too. The other stop you should make is in Scotland. There, visit Loch Ness. It's a big loch or lake. It is said to be home to the famous Loch Ness Monster. Tourists flood this lake to catch a glimpse of Nessie, which is what they have called the Loch Ness Monster. Take your camera. Maybe you'll be the first person in years to spot this underwater creature. So here's a picture of Stonehenge. It says, and then here's a picture of the Loch Ness Monster. This photo was believed to show the Loch Ness Monster, but most people now think it's fake. Here's another picture of Loch Ness. Loch means lake in Scottish. All right, the fascinating history of the UK says our country has a long history filled with kings and queens and battles. The Celts were one of the first groups to settle here thousands of years ago. Then the Romans invaded about 55 years before Jesus was born. So when you go to the UK, you can still see lots of the engineering that the Romans did. Romans were famous engineers, and they made roads and sewers and water transport systems that still have survived to this day in the UK and really throughout Europe. But it's amazing that the Roman Empire got as far, extended as far as up to the United Kingdom. Celtic Queen Boudica is famous. There she is, a picture of her. Celtic Queen Boudica. She's famous for fighting the Romans, though she was defeated. The Romans built many roads and walls and cities. Some of these structures still exist today. In fact, London was a Roman city originally. In the 400s, Anglo-Saxons from Europe replaced the Romans. They created many small kingdoms. In the year 1066, so almost 1,000 years ago, Normans from what is now France defeated the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons were mainly from Northern Europe, especially Germany and Holland, Denmark, that area. But in 1066, people from what is now France invaded the UK and defeated the Anglo-Saxons. Their king was called William the Conqueror, and he took power. And ever since then, the UK has had a series of kings and queens. Starting in the late 1500s, the UK took over lands all around the globe. Many of these countries eventually became independent, including the United States and also India, which we've talked about. But some countries like Australia and Canada are still tied together, connected to the UK in what's called a Commonwealth. They're part of the Commonwealth of the United Kingdom. Today, our Queen has very little power. We are a democracy with an elected Prime Minister and Parliament, much like the US President and Congress. So what's this thing here called? We learned about it in history. It's called a timeline. So about 2,000 years before Jesus was born, the Celts took over the islands of the United Kingdom. 55 years before Jesus, the Romans invaded and took over. About 400 years after Jesus was born, Anglo-Saxons, Germanic tribes from Northern Europe, invaded and took over. They drove out the Romans. Then in 1066, William the Conqueror from what's now France invaded and became the first king of England. From the 1500s to the 1900s, the British Empire, Britain was the most powerful country in the world. Then there were the two world wars, which the UK was allies with the United States in. And then from 1952 to today, Queen Elizabeth II has been the monarch, the queen, but for several hundred years now, the United Kingdom has been more of a democracy. The king or queen doesn't have much power. The prime minister is kind of like our president, and they have a parliament, which is kind of like our Congress. Queen Elizabeth II has been ruling for more than 60 years. I didn't know this. I didn't know that she is the longest serving ruler in the whole history of the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth II. Wow, that's amazing. All right, so tomorrow we will look at some things that are part of the culture of the United Kingdom that have spread around the world. We'll look at how they celebrate their holidays and their culture. And if we have time, we might get to look at their sports and more interesting facts. We'll see. All right. Thank you for reading with me today. I hope you enjoyed the true story of the Three Little Pigs. Tomorrow, we're going to learn about another way to tell the story of the Three Little Pigs. And we'll finish reading up about the United Kingdom. All right. As they say in the UK, cheers or cheerio.